Hey y'all, it's Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis, coming to you from my living room. Once again, the weather is nice today, but I'm still going to film inside. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is not orchid culture. It's not pretty flowers. It's unpopular orchid opinions. And I've got 4 today. And this will be actually the third video that I've made like this in this series. And I had kind of forgotten about this. And then a person on Reddit said, "Hey, what's your orchid hot takes?" And this person is a catastrophe waitress. And I'm glad she asked because like I said, I'd forgotten about this series and it's fun. I know some people tend to get all hot and bothered by it, but don't let it get under your skin. These are my opinions and I'm sticking by them. I encourage you to convince me why I'm wrong, though. But just a quick recap, I'll have the 2 videos that I've already done at the end of this video. And just to recap some of the previous hot takes or unpopular opinions I've had, probably the one that gets the most comments is never ever use hydrogen peroxide on your roots, folks. I'm telling you, it is useless at best, harmful at worst. I've had it kill my plants. I've seen it damage other people's plants. There's just no reason for use of hydrogen peroxide on roots. It's so destructive. But that's a whole other video. In fact, I also did a video with the plant propagator talking about that. If you're interested in that, go check that out. Another one of my previous ones is that I think Monnieri, Millennium Witchcraft, which is sort of the original black orchid, is dog ugly. It is hideous. I to this day, I don't know why people buy it, but it's so popular. It's really easy to grow, but I just think it is butt ugly, and you can't convince me otherwise. That said, let's jump into today's 4 unpopular opinions. One of the things that I see, number 1, mold is bad. Mold isn't really bad. I see so many people online saying, "Oh my God, there's mold in my media," or "Oh my God, there's mold on the side of my pot. I can see in my clear pot that there's mold." Who cares? It doesn't matter. For the most part, there's kind of one exception to that, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But mold in the media is not a thing like that that's going to hurt your plants. It might look unsightly, but typically what happens, and this is really common on brand new potting media, there's mold spores in the air, there's mold spores in the media, there's mold spores everywhere. There's no reason to disinfect your media because the moment you're done disinfecting it, it's instantly colonized by a new batch of microorganisms, including fungi. And that's why you see mold pop up on really fresh media. What happens is that mold has this new sort of habitat, I guess. It's got free nutrients. It has no predators. It just goes crazy. And so it sort of blooms. And I'm using bloom as sort of a way to express the very rapid growth that the mold has. And then it kind of dies back. And it's always there. And not only is it always there, but it's helping to break down your media, which is a good thing, because breaking down the media means you're getting free nutrients from your media being put into your orchids, and mold is the intermediary between the nutrients locked in the media and the nutrients being taken up by the roots. So mold in and of itself is not a bad thing. Don't freak out. It'll probably go away. Most likely, if you have mold and you don't have brand new media, you might want to increase the air circulation where the mold is. Maybe punch a hole in the pot if it bothers you, or a little less water, or a little more air movement. There's a lot of things you can do if the mold is very persistent. Now, I mentioned that there's one bad exception, and that's snow mold. And snow mold can actually take over the roots of your plant and kill them. And I've only seen it a couple times, and it has taken out a couple cattleyas of mine. And it's just this mold that's really dense, really thick, and it kind of looks like spider eggs, if that makes sense. It's that thick, and you just see like these really dark dots, not dark, but sort of thicker white dots, sort of embedded within the mold, and it just covers everything. So that's an issue. Physan would be my remedy for something like that. Repotting, not hydrogen peroxide, but there's other things you can do to really knock back the snow mold, which can hurt. All right, the second unpopular opinion. Actually, I feel like this could be not a super unpopular opinion. This is water culture. Using water culture on orchids. I'm not talking about semi-hydroponics, and I'm talking about having your orchids in a glass of water that stays full of water all the time. Just don't do it. Seriously, like there's like apparently there's a person on YouTube that's sort of infecting everybody's brain with like this is how you can do it, and that person, apparently, I haven't watched their video, but that person is appears to be fairly successful. The thing with water culture is it's a science experiment. You have to have that water maintaining certain chemistry at all times, and acclimating your plant to that particular water chemistry doesn't really make sense. Just grow your plants in a normal pot with normal media and learn how to grow them that way. It's a lot easier. And if you go online, you just see thousands of posts littering the internet, basically saying, "Oh, my plant's not doing well because my roots are in water. I tried to follow this person's example of how to grow, and it doesn't work." Well, that's because orchids don't grow that way. I think the closest thing that I do actually is the PET method, where I have catasetum roots, the root tips sitting in water, but that's how they grow in the wild. A lot of them grow into these nooks of the leaves, where the leaf axil of a palm tree connects to the palm tree itself, and water and moisture collect in there, and those roots going down there, and they just slurp up the water. So they're adapted for that. Phalaenopsis, not so much. Cattleyas, definitely not. It does seem like most people do Phalaenopsis. So I would really encourage everyone to not do that. And I say that it's not that big of an unpopular opinion because it seems like more and more people online are saying, don't do that, don't do that. It's not good. And that's good. Keep it up, everybody. Let's make sure that people grow their orchids in a manner that will be successful and that they will be able to sort of manage over the long term. Oh, one more thing on water culture. You'll see people say, "Oh, I'm doing so well with my water culture," and what happens is they've switched over from normal media to water culture for like a month, maybe 2 or 3, and the plant hasn't quite started that downward spiral. Almost no one posts photos of their water culture orchids a year or 2 or 5 after they've sort of made that switch, because the plant probably doesn't live that long. So again, let's just not do that. The third unpopular opinion is that fertilizer type doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You see people get really like sort of hot-blooded over their particular fertilizer. They think their fertilizer is the best. You have to use this fertilizer. You have to use these types of fertilizers. When in reality, fertilizer type is probably the least important part of good orchid culture. To be honest, you can grow orchids in almost any fertilizer if you get the concentration correct. You hear people even saying, don't use urea-based fertilizer. It's terrible. One of the best orchid growers I've ever met in my entire life in Austin, she has used Miracle-Gro, which is urea-based, for decades, and it works great. Another thing that people often say is, oh, MSU is the best. It's made for orchids. Sorry, folks, it's not made for orchids. It's good, don't get me wrong, but it's made for dirt plants, plants grown in dirt. And again, people have great success with MSU fertilizer, not because it's the best, but because it's a fertilizer and the plants are uptaking nutrients. Really, what you want to look for in a fertilizer is to have all of your macro and micronutrients all in one. And then for me, I like to add kelp once a month. And for my catasetums, I like to have a little bit of Jim's Purely Organic. It's just sort of a mix that works for me. And if you're wondering what I use for my main fertilizer, I use K-Lite Plus from First Ray's Orchids. I've known Ray online, not in person, but just online for, I guess, decades at this point. I really like the way he sort of conducts himself as being very scientific. He's got a chemistry background, and he's used his powers of chemistry for good, and has gone out of his way to actually design orchid fertilizers that are for orchids. And he's a small business owner. I like to support him, and it works. But again, this isn't like somehow the magical best. I just like this. This is what I recommend to people. And you could use there's 100 or 1,000 orchid fertilizers online that you could buy, or in a store, or even not even an orchid fertilizer, and your plants are going to do just fine. So don't sweat it. Buy whatever's on sale, or buy, support your local small businesses. Whatever, your orchids will probably be just fine. Oh, and Bloom Booster is snake oil. There's no need to use it. All right, number 4. I have been growing orchids for over 30 years now, which is crazy to think about. A, that I'm that old, and B, that I've been growing orchids that long. But, I've experimented with all kinds of growing types. I started growing as a kid in Canada. So, of course, most of my orchid growing experience at that point, as a 12-year-old, was indoors with like a month or two, the plants outside. Of course, they all died. But then I've grown in southern Arizona, I've grown in Hawaii, and I've grown in different parts of central and south Texas, indoors and outdoors. But my first real terrarium that I grown orchids in, I grew about 12 years ago in an apartment when I first moved to Austin. And I found that, in my mind, I had this thing that, there's got to be tons of air movement, tons and tons of air movement. Otherwise, my plants are going to get moldy, and they're going to get rot, and they're just going to die. So as many of you may know from watching my videos, I like to torture my plants. I like to find out what those sort of maximum and minimum sort of conditions are, all kinds of conditions that these plants can tolerate. And it helps me, I think, to become a better grower, to find out, like, what are the extremes that these plants can grow under. And so I started testing, just keeping my terrarium totally closed. Nothing happened. There was no fan in there. And then, so I would crack a little bit and leave it open, or I would just almost completely seal it. Not really, it wasn't like a hard seal. And the plants were fine. So then I took this terrarium, and I'm showing some of the pictures from back then. I took this terrarium to work, and then I had some wood in there, and I had this Bulbophyllum Denisii and some of these other orchids just growing like wildfire, and the lid was mostly closed. So it kind of dawned on me that orchids, creating broad generalizations is generally not a great idea. But it made me think that the whole air movement, creating this sort of hurricane around your plants is not necessarily something that needs to be done in every situation. And so what I see now is people setting up orchid rootstock cabinets or different IKEA cabinets. And the first thing they do is they seal it so that it gets to 90 or 100% humidity, which most of the orchids we're growing are not interested in those conditions. And then they add a fan, which of course in a small cabinet, a fan takes up a lot of space. So what if there was a system where you didn't have to have this fan creating a hurricane because you didn't lock in all the humidity. And it turns out, if you just don't seal your grow cabinets and you let air come in and out, you don't need a fan. The air will move in and out freely. And I can show you here is a video of my old cabinet and then also my newer cabinet that I just set up and is doing pretty nice. But my older cabinet's been up for about a year and a half, and I have humidity and temperature monitoring in there, and there's really no reason, unless you're growing these sort of high elevation cloud forest orchids, then maybe you want to seal it, and then maybe you want to have air movement. But even then, I don't know that it's necessarily true. I would love for people to comment and say, hey, I have also grown orchids in sort of sealed conditions and they did just fine. But I also want to hear from folks who like, I tried that, it's terrible, it doesn't work, don't do it. So there's so many different types of orchids out there and so many different environments. This is a broad generalization, but my point is, if you're growing sort of the more traditional Phalaenopsis, Cattleyas, and you're throwing them in a cabinet, you don't necessarily need an incredible hurricane growing in there. And you also don't need to seal the humidity in that cabinet. They do just fine with 40 to 60% humidity. That's sort of the sweet spot, to be honest, that 50-ish percent. If you're getting above 75% humidity, most of the orchids that we're growing they're not super excited about that. Anyway, those are the 4 things I wanted to talk about today. What do you think? Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Let's chat.